And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Doing the Work, the first show on the Back Home Network covering IU women's basketball. This is our 91st episode, recorded on Wednesday, December 13th, 2023. I'm your host, Jeff Morrow, joined by my co-host tonight, Kathy Amos. And tonight, we'll be previewing the women's game against the University of Evansville and talking about some of the Big Ten so far this year. But we're going to start tonight the way we do every episode, and that's with our banner moment. And Kathy, I'm going to go back to Saturday against Rutgers. Coach Terry Morin recorded her 100th career Big Ten victory with the IU Hoosiers. And so our banner moment, congratulations to Coach Morin on her 100th career Big Ten victory. And that is our banner moment. As usual, our banner moment is brought to you by Home Field Apparel, presenting sponsor of the Back Home Network, who includes the Assembly Call and Crimson Cast. Home Field is constantly releasing new schools or updating their products for schools in their existing line. You are bound to find something for you or anyone in your life that just loves great collegiate gear. Right now, they have all kind of fun stuff coming out for 12 days of Christmas. Not only do you get quality apparel, but you're also supporting an Indiana-based business that has its roots in the Kelley School of Business. Go to homefieldapparel.com and use our promo code HOME23. That's HOME23, HOME23, for 15% off your entire first order. That's promo code HOME23 for 15% off. Once again, the website is homefieldapparel.com, and wear one for the team. And we'll kind of take a quick look at the news here. Not a lot. IU's off all week. They won't play again until next Monday, or this coming Monday, I should say. So it's finals week in Bloomington. Hopefully the players are concentrating on their exams, and I'm sure trying to get some practice time squeezed in as well. The one news we did have, IU moved up to number 15 in both polls this week. Actually, up in the AP poll, they stayed at 15 in the coaches poll. So we're going to throw it over to Kathy for the Amos angle and get her initial thoughts on tonight's podcast and what she's got on her mind.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff. Good night, everyone. So another ranking coming out, and here we are in the polls yet again. And I know we were just texting with our friend Ari, and IU has not been outside of the polls since McKenzie has joined Indiana. So for 4.5 years during the regular season, Indiana has now been ranked in the top 25. So that's just a great accomplishment by the team and a great way to look at the big picture, I think, of this program. We often, especially as we're doing these evening games these post-game shows and everything that we're talking about in the heart of the season, it's sometimes easy to lose sight of the big picture sometimes of the program overall. And, you look back to 5-6 years ago when Coach Morin was still kind of getting everything going. That's quite an accomplishment, 4.5 years. For a long time, the Indiana women's program was kind of an afterthought in the Big Ten. And now here they are year in and year out vying for a Big Ten championship. So just a great accomplishment by Coach Morin.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for those of us who kind of remember where the program was pre-Terry Morin, that's a big, big moment. So Kathy is, had to step away for a second, so I'll take the reins here. Again, let's preview the upcoming opponent. That's Evansville. Evansville will be the Hoosiers' next opponent on Monday. When they host Simon Scott Assembly Hall. And Kathy, I forgot to put it in the run sheet, but I think that game is on regular BTN, and I don't have the time for it.
Yeah, let me look that up. Sorry about that. I had an error on my insulin pump I needed to turn off, or it was going to keep beeping at us all night. They play on Monday at 7 Eastern, 6 Central, and they are on Big Ten Plus.
Okay, Big Ten Plus. All right.
Yep,
so I was thinking they were on regular BTN, but so Big Ten Plus for that game on Monday night. Evansville currently 1-7. Their only wins over Chicago State, 103-102. Barn burner there. They'll play Lindenwood on the 16th before they play us. So Kathy, why don't you take the Sky report from here a little bit?
Yeah. So Evansville is coached by Robin Sher-Wells. She's in her third year with the University of Evansville. So as a team, they are averaging right around 73 points per game. They're shooting 36% on field goal percentage, only 27.5% 3-point percentage. The interesting thing, the number that really stuck out to me when looking at them as a team is they have committed 20 turnovers per game, which is a lot. But they're forcing 15.4. So I think that'll be an interesting thing to kind of watch to see, if our defense can turn them over where their average really is. Kind of landing them in terms of players, individual players. They're pretty young in terms of who's leading them in scoring. So they have Ken Mason Stiverson. She's a sophomore, 5'8" guard. She's averaging 17 points per game and 4 assists per game. And then Maggie Hartwig is a freshman. She's their second leading scorer at 11 points per game, and she has almost 8 rebounds per game, and she is a 6'1" forward. So it seems like they're led by a fairly young team from what I could tell, Jeff. But what are your thoughts on the Purple Aces?
Well, yeah, you talk about your leading scorers are sophomore and a freshman, so that tells you right now that you, at least the key people you're wanting that you're depending upon are young. The thing that really jumped out to me, Kathy, on their stats was the shooting. Yeah, they're turning it over a ton, but they're only shooting 36%, and that's just even for a team that's struggling, that's just an awful percentage. And you want to kind of, and IU doesn't want to be the team that they break out on, but but they're averaging 73 a game. So they're probably getting a lot of shot opportunities. And I didn't take a deep dive into their stats to look and see what kind of offensive rebounding and numbers they have. But to be getting 73 a game on 36% shooting, they're either trying to play an up-tempo game, or they're crashing the glass and getting second, third opportunities that they're just not converting on either. But yeah, I think this is a game where, again, struggle bus for Evansville. We posted this in the Substack a little bit, and their net is really down in terms of where they are. And Sher-Wells is one that they really have some high hopes for. I think they just extended her actually last year with her contract because they felt like she had done such a good job. I want to say from last year to this year, or first year to second year, she doubled their output in wins. Now it wasn't huge, and it wasn't like they went from 10 to 20. But Evansville's been struggling on the women's side for a while. And so she was able to get them. I believe she got me right around 10 or 11 wins last year. So, but again, you're trying to play with some younger players. So this is one, I think, just come out and take care of business. You have a good start, kind of get on them early, and they're probably going to go away. The longer you let them hang around, then all of a sudden they become a little more dangerous, and you're starting to, get into kind of a nail biter. But being at home, the thing here you worry about a little bit, Kathy, too, is the layoff, because you haven't played for over a week at this point, but with finals and stuff. But so we'll see we'll see how it goes. But I think this is one that we all probably chalked up as a win when we went through the preseason schedule.
Yeah, it doesn't look, again, on paper. I haven't watched University of Evansville, so I can't speak to how they've looked in any of their games, but it's only one win, and it was a really tight win against Chicago State, and then some of their other losses, it wasn't like they were playing all Power 5 in their 7 losses either. So on paper, it looks like this is one we should, have a very good handle on. And so again, what I'm kind of looking for is what kind of defensive intensity they have coming out of the gate. And can they sustain that for the whole time, even if they have a big lead? Bench play in particular, I think, is going to be important here. And then, of course, rebounding. I think it's kind of the 3 things we've been really focusing on this year in terms of things we'd like to see improve. But those are the 3 things I'll be kind of watching for in this Evansville game, especially the rebounding and the defensive intensity from our bench, which I expect will get quite a bit of play on Monday.
Yeah, and Eagle Eye points out in the Workaholics, and I totally agree. This would be a really good game to try and get Lily Meister some minutes. I think she does have a little bit of there's a little I hate to call it crisis of confidence, Kathy, but I think we see a little bit of that. She's really started to kind of second guess when she's out there, rather than just playing like she did last year, where she would come into the game and she kind of had a fearlessness to her. And right now you kind of see her thinking a little bit. You see her, kind of, almost afraid to make a mistake. And so we need to get her having some confidence back, because I think Lily's going to have could have a big role in the second half of the season. By the way, also want to shout out or give a shout out. I saw this on Twitter today, but for any of you want to go look it up on Google, Crimson Corey had a nice article today about the IU bench and focusing primarily on the guards. It was the guards, Lexi, Lene, Jules, and Hannah, and what their role will be kind of going forward, what we can hope to see from minutes, what can they bring. And they made the comment that Kathy, you and I were making the other day, and we've made a couple times on the podcast. This is maybe the deepest IU team we've seen since we've been doing the show, but will Coach Morton trust that depth and continue to play them?
Yeah, that's a great point, Jeff. And, listening to Coach Moran's show this week with Austin Render that was recorded Monday night, he asked about the bench play and why maybe they didn't get very much, very deep in that Rutgers games that we talked about, only three deep and even not a whole lot of minutes from two of the three that played. And she said, it was just important for them to be on the road in the conference, playing their first conference game to get off to a good start. And it was a fairly tight game. And she said, I will always defer to experience in that case. So that's why she went with her starters and with Lexi with so many minutes on that game. So, but at what point, to your point, what point do you start trusting your bench? Because you're really going to have to, if we're going to have some higher expectations, I think, as the season continues on.
Yeah, and I don't know. I didn't go back to look and see if Crimson Corey had done something on the forwards and type thing. But I think you got to go back, as we mentioned. I think Lily plays a big role here, just because you want to try and manage McKenzie's minutes. Even at Rutgers, McKenzie played the least of any of the starters, if I recall off the top of my head.
She did.
And so I think that's a good thing. I think, you don't need Mac running up 35, 37 minutes in December, but you need to have Lily needs to provide a little more of the production that we saw from her last year. And we know she's capable. That's why I think Kathy should just having there's a little bit of confidence, a drop right now. And again, it only takes a game or two to get it back. Have a good game, come out there, do your production. And I think one of the things that's really where you see this is how many games now, and I'm not trying to get an exact count, but where Lily comes in and maybe within the first minute or so, she gets called for a moving screen, and which actually counts as a turnover as well. So it's really kind of a double whammy. You get the foul and a turnover. And I don't really remember any of that last year. So is that on the guards not waiting for her to get the screen set, or is she still, or is she not getting into the proper positioning to get a good screen set? But it just seems like that's happened to her quite a few games.
Yeah, you're right, Jeff. I hadn't really thought about that. The other thing, though, at a kind of a more macro level with that, one thing, my husband and I talked about in the couple of women's games that we watched, not just Indiana women's games, but it just seems like it's more of a point of emphasis as well for the referees, which could be a contributing factor as well. We know there's always seems like there's something that's a point of thing that they focus on, the referees. And to us, it seems like there's a lot of moving screens being called in the women's game. So that's something to watch. I hadn't necessarily noticed that with Lily per se. I noticed it more in the overall college women's basketball game this year.
So anything else you want to add into this, Kathy, about Evansville? And I totally agree with what Eagle Eye points out here in the Workaholics. And I thought you raised a great point. That's that comment by Coach Moran that's her. That's the way she's built this program. So at least she's consistent with it.
And it's worked. So,
but anything else you want to add about it? Anything else you want to add about Evansville?
Nope. I think I'm good.
So we kind of gave our first quarter grades on IU last week. So we're not going to talk a ton about the Hoosiers, but we will kind of reference them back here as we go through our discussion about the Big Ten. And Kathy, I'll kind of get this started here. Just some highlights of the Big Ten. 3 teams right now currently ranked in the top 25: Iowa, Ohio State, and IU, based on this week's rankings. 6 teams are in the current bracketology on ESPN. The 3 teams I mentioned already, plus Maryland, Nebraska, and Michigan. And then Minnesota and Penn State are in the first 4 out. And then here, I think, is a key number. 10 teams in the Big Ten are in the top 50 of this week's net. And that includes Michigan State and Illinois. And Illinois, I believe, was actually number 50. So you look at the Big Ten, it may not be showing up in the rankings. And we're going to kind of go through this a little bit as we, with this, kind of outlook or, what I want to call a review of the Big Ten here. But there are a lot of opportunities for quad 1 wins going into Big Ten season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a woman's perspective, or from the Big Ten perspective, rather, excuse me, maybe they don't have a lot of huge signature wins across the board in the Big Ten and their non-conference play, but I feel like overall it's been pretty solid from the conference as a whole. You've had for the most part the top teams there, Iowa, Ohio State, and Indiana in particular, really kind of taking care of business for the most part. And we'll get into that a little more in the games that you expected, right? I know Indiana didn't look great against Stanford and they lost that game, which is as expected. It just probably wasn't the differential that we expected, but otherwise the record's the same that we expected, or even better in my case, because like I had said before, I thought they might want to drop one of those games down in Fort Myers, and they won both of them. So, record wise, they're right there as well. And, we'll get into Iowa and Ohio State. And then you have some surprising teams like Penn State, especially for me, has been quite a surprise. I know their first four out, but they weren't a team we really even talked about in the preseason. So last year was kind of Illinois who snuck up on people. It feels like Penn State is kind of taking that in. And then you have a few like Illinois that maybe I thought would be a little stronger in the non-conference. So we'll see how they do when we get into conference play. I think maybe the biggest surprise is maybe the Maryland team. I thought that they would have maybe performed a little bit better than they have. But, again, we'll talk about them. The losses weren't like they were to bad losses. I think they were all to ranked teams as well.
Yeah, and I think the thing that you look at, and it's still December, so time for for some of these teams that we thought were going to play better, Illinois, Maryland, and to turn it around, and all of a sudden now they're in the top 4 or 5 of the Big Ten at the end of the year. But based on what we've seen on the court, and this is where I think that sometimes, and for those of you who follow us in the Substack, I've been, kind of a one-man power ranking and not trying to toot the horn or anything. But, at this point, though, some results matter a little bit. I think you can go by talent. But you look at Illinois, it's hard to say Illinois is a top 4 or 5 team in the league after they get smoked at home by 36. I mean, it's one, you can lose at home, but you can't lose by 36 and have people think that you're really, really good. Again, long time to go before now and the end of the season, and that can change. That's the beauty of doing the power ranking every week. But, but you look at this, Kathy, I want you, especially since you're in Iowa and you hear maybe just a little bit more, why don't you talk about Iowa real quick, and then we'll discuss them where they're at so far in the Big Ten season.
Yeah. So for Iowa, they have only lost one game, and that was to Kansas State. They lost him. The surprising part about losing to Kansas State was that they had lost to them last year as well. But this year was at home. And they lost 58-65. So somehow Kansas State found a way to shut down their entire offense, which is kind of what they're built on. They're averaging right around just under 89 points per game as a team, with Caitlin Clark by herself averaging 29 and a half of those points. Now, the good thing for them is they turned around and beat Kansas State again later that year, or later this year already. They played them in Florida over Thanksgiving. They ended up beating them down there in a neutral site, 77-70. So there you go. You kind of see the key is if you can somehow slow Iowa's offense down, holding them to 58 at home where they didn't, and they got it back into that 70 range, 77, and they lost. So I think the key to Iowa is just somehow, again, figuring out how to slow their offense down. And I don't know if you do that or not. The other great win for Iowa is Virginia Tech. That was at a neutral site location. That was really interesting story, for women's basketball in general, because Virginia Tech and Iowa, both the universities were both paid to come into I forget the location.
Charlotte, wasn't it?
Charlotte, yes, thank you. I was going to say Chattanooga. It's the wrong CH town. So they were paid to come into Charlotte to pay, to draw in that crowd. And I think they ended up selling out the arena. I know this Saturday coming up too, Iowa is playing here. The men and the women are both playing in our large Wells Fargo arena here in Des Moines, and that's sold out as well. So I've heard so many phrases, right? Clarkonomics is one. The Clarkonomics effect is real, right? Like wherever she's at, she is drawing people in and drawing a crowd, and you can see that. And I was thinking they would be off a little bit with Sonano leaving, but Caitlin Clark has upped her production, and the rest of the team is up theirs just enough that they are really picking up, I think, almost where they left off last year.
Yeah. And I will say, Yeah, and I will say this: they are strictly, I shouldn't say strictly. They are primarily an offensive team.
Yep.
So if you look at that, though, the cumulative with K State is basically an even game. They lost by 7 at home. They won by 7 at the neutral site. If I'm Iowa, I'm not sure I want to see K State in the NCAA tournament. Send them off to the other side of the country, but don't send them to us. Um,
Right.
but like you said, that went over Virginia Tech, even though they got to 80, Virginia Tech had done a pretty decent job of slowing them down. That was a very good game.
Yeah, it was.
Again, as you pointed out in Charlotte. I think what we'll see, and this is one of the things I think we're all kind of waiting to see, is can the Big Ten team slow Caitlin Clark down just enough? And I'm not talking about holding her to 20. Can you hold her to 24, 25? Yeah. And then will she get enough help? Is there enough help there to help to overcome that 5 to 6 points? Because more than likely that's actually going to end up cascading, because she's probably not going to get a couple more assists, or a few more assists, and things like that. So I hate to say it, Iowa goes as Caitlin Clark goes, but I think that's pretty realistic to say, and true. So can Ohio State slow them down just enough? Can Indiana slow them down just enough? And because if you can, then the Big Ten race really becomes a dogfight. And I still think on paper, Ohio State, Iowa, Indiana are the cream of the crop. But it's going to come down to what you can do on the floor. And that's, kind of what we're talking about tonight. So any other thoughts about Iowa, Kathy?
No, I don't think so. I do think they're a little more susceptible perhaps this year than they were last year, just because they don't have that strong second presence like they did with Sonano. So they definitely, I think, you're going to see them drop a few other games like they did to Kansas State. It's just to see who can have that key, that recipe to unlocking, slowing Clark down.
Yeah, and the other thing is, and I know they get great crowd. They were getting great crowds already, but those sold out crowds in Carver Hawkeye Arena are going to help them.
Yes.
And against some of these better teams as well that they get coming in there. So, there's an advantage there. So teams that go in there that want to try and pull off the road upset, and kudos to K-State already, but Ohio State, and I can't remember who all, I know Indiana goes out there, but I'm trying to remember who all the top teams that we kind of projected going to Iowa, that you got to overcome the crowd. You got to be able to overcome all of that. And that's worth a good 8 to 10 points right there. So you're gonna have to overcome that. Let's talk about Ohio State real quick.
Yeah.
Ohio State 8-1 overall. Their only loss was their season opener to USC, 83-74. But they've also beat Oklahoma State, who's kind of fallen back to around 500. They had a nice win against Tennessee in Knoxville, but this is one that becomes an issue for Indiana, Kathy. Tennessee has dropped all the way to like 96th in the net. They've dropped out of the top, they're almost out of the top 100 in the net. In fact, Charlie Cream had them out of his bracket this week. Not just out of the top 16. They were out of the bracket, period. They're 4-5. And a lot of that's because Rakea Jackson has not played since about the second game of the year. But so both these teams, IU and Ohio State, probably need Tennessee to get turned around a little bit for that win to become a better win, even though at the time they were good wins. They did win their Big Ten opener against Penn State in Columbus in overtime, 94-84. And we're going to talk about Penn State a little bit more here in a few minutes. But J.C. Shelton had a huge game in that game against Penn State. And Kathy, I just think when they're firing on all cylinders, again, that's a huge if, I know. But on paper, to me, they definitely are better talent-wise overall than Iowa and IU. Hard for me to say. I think that I've said this from the beginning, so I'm not doing anything. I'm staying with my prediction for people who are coming in late going, what? I said at the very beginning of the season, I thought on paper, Ohio State was the most talented team in the league and should win the league. But they don't always play that way. And so, but just talk a little bit about what you see out of Ohio State. Because again, we know what we're going to see, a lot of pressure. And that was what they really did to Tennessee. I watched a lot of that second half, and they had the pressure going, and they just turned them over, and it was layups a couple times. For a while, you thought it was like layup city.
Yeah. So I haven't had a chance to watch much of Ohio State. I did get to watch the second half of their game against Penn State in the overtime. The thing that was surprising to me in that game was that Ohio State, at least in the second half, they weren't pressing. And that was surprising to me. And so again, not knowing what happened in the first half, maybe Penn State was just easily breaking their press. I'm not sure. But that seemed to be something when I did watch them in the Tennessee game quite a bit. They were pressing quite a bit there. So I'm not quite sure if it's something to watch with their press or not, but that's always the thing that I think teams dread. But I think maybe that Penn State was an anomaly, but Penn State gave them everything they could. And to be honest, I think Penn State would have been even closer than that 10-point deficit, but their best player, Marisa, went out in that overtime pretty early on with some kind of leg injury, it looked like. So I was really impressed with Penn State with Ohio State, and that was at Ohio State too. But like you said, JC Sheldon, and then you got Cody McMahon, who's averaging right at 17 points as well. So you have two players on your team averaging 17 points per game, and then you surround them with a lot of the other players that Ohio State has. And then when their press is really working, they can really turn them over. I still feel on paper Ohio State is the team to beat as well this year in the conference.
Okay. I don't have anything else about Ohio State. So Kathy, why don't you take a quick look at Nebraska for us?
Yeah, so Nebraska right now is 8-2 overall. They had two losses. One was at home to Creighton, and the other one was to TCU, and that game was at a neutral site in Florida as well over the holidays. They don't have a whole lot of big wins yet, though. So the interesting thing, they have Georgia Tech and Wyoming that they've beat, and then they did open Big Ten play on the road to Michigan State, who they beat 80-74. The interesting thing for me is that they're averaging right at 81 points per game, but they're holding their opponents to under 60 points per game. So again, is that because their defense has really gotten better, or is it the nature of their opponents that they have? And then they're led by Alexis Markowski, who is leading their team as well at 16.8 points per game. So Nebraska is an interesting case because they haven't had any really great tests like we've already seen for Ohio State or for Iowa or Indiana. So I'm not quite sure what to think of Nebraska yet. And I feel like they're kind of an open question for me because on paper, again, they look like they have the experience that they might be able to compete, but until they're really tested getting into Big Ten play here with some of the top half of the league, I'm not quite sure what to think of them.
No, but this is a team that last year we all kind of thought might be a top 5, top 6 team in the league. And they had a couple of injuries that kind of took them off of that. But one thing we'll say about Nebraska, when they are healthy, and it looks like they are starting to play better than they did last year, they are dangerous at home. And that Lincoln is a tough place to play. With that. But I think, Kathy, you hit the nail on the head here with a lot of these teams that we're talking about here. Who have they played? I think the one thing that the non-conference strength of schedule is going to come back to maybe hurt a little bit. I think this is why, for example, Charlie Cream has Nebraska at a 9 seed right now at 8-2. I didn't bring my net rankings home to take a look at Nebraska, but Nebraska, has a decent net ranking. But, it makes me wonder how that'll play out as we go through the season. But Markowski's a real deal. And so they've got some talent. It's just a matter of last year that didn't really seem to come together the way we thought it would. And this is a team that we were talking about a year or so ago being like, man, really not sure I want to go to Lincoln. And this team could be dangerous come tournament time. And it never really panned out that way for them. They were kind of a borderline bubble team. It seemed like the whole season as we went into the NCAA tournament. And speaking of another one, and they're kind of the same boat, Minnesota got beat by a UConn, their only loss so far in Minneapolis, 62-44. Other than that, they've won all 9 of their games, including beating Purdue to open up Big Ten season at Williams Arena, 60-58 the other day. But their wins are Drake in 2 overtimes, Kentucky at Kentucky, but neither of them are world beaters, and Kentucky's really struggling right now. So just, it seems like, and UConn's not UConn per se in terms of where they are right now in the ranking. So how good is Minnesota? It's nice to see. I will say this as somebody who's followed Big Ten basketball for a while. It's nice to see Minnesota be back in this discussion where they were a few years, where for the last few years, they've been at the bottom really pretty much of the league. So, but how good are they? They're averaging 77 points a game. They're giving up 55, but I think that's as much about who they've played rather than their talent level. I could be wrong. We'll find out. They're led by Mara Braun, just under 20 points a game. So So, but yeah, to me, Minnesota's going to be that team that I could see very easily. Either they'll stay here or they'll plummet, and at the end of the season, we're going to be, man, remember we thought Minnesota was 9-1, might be more worth watching, and they're going to be missing the tournament. So, they're to me they're one of those teams that, kind of like, okay, we need more body of evidence here.
Yeah, Minnesota and Nebraska, I both have in that camp of I'm not quite sure what to think of them. I did find the net rankings that you looked up, so I'll just get us kind of caught up here. So for Indiana, in case people aren't following us in Substack, they are number 30 in the net rankings. Iowa is number 6. Michigan State, which I think we're talking about them later, number 11, which is interesting. Ohio State 16, Nebraska is 18. And Minnesota is 41. So those are our teams we've covered so far. So net ranking 41 for Minnesota. So doesn't quite like them as much as what you might think of for a 9-1 team. And I think to your point, it's the kind of the strength of the schedule again. Outside of UConn, who have they really played? And they lost quite handily to UConn too. So I don't know what to think of Minnesota. I do think that, water will find its level here personally when Big Ten conference starts. And I still expect them to be in the kind of that middle pack, if not towards the bottom of the middle pack. I don't think they'll be the bottom of the Big Ten, but I don't think that I think they might have the chance to surprise a couple people. You never want to take anyone for granted, especially going up to Minnesota, but they're not anyone I'm particularly concerned about just yet.
I'm going to skip one here for you, Kathy. Let's go down to Michigan on the run sheet. How don't you talk about Michigan? Let's kind of stay with what the pleasant surprises of the league are so far.
Yeah. So Michigan right now is 8-2 overall. They are 1-0 in the Big Ten with a win over Illinois at Illinois, which was a handy win, 84-48. Their 2 losses though were to Ole Miss, 60-49, and Toledo, 69-46. They are only averaging 73 points per game, but they're also only allowing 54 points per game, 55 basically. And then Layla Filia is averaging 15 points per game to lead them in terms of scoring. And then in terms of their net ranking, Michigan is actually number 28 right now. So they're just above Indiana in that net ranking. So it's just a very interesting case with Michigan. I think we were kind of surprised, if I remember earlier in the year, when we were doing our preseason talk of before anything started, and the coaches were talking a lot about Michigan, but they weren't really on anyone else's radar outside the coaches. So again, I think they're a team to kind of watch, especially going into Illinois like that and beating a team where we thought Illinois was actually going to be kind of competing a little more in that top of the Big Ten. So again, not quite sure what to think, especially going and losing to Ole Miss and Toledo. So what are your thoughts on Michigan?
Well, that's exactly, again, kind of wait and see. I'm still not sold that they're a top 5 team in the league, but they are 8-2. But you talk about that Illinois game. It was just a handful of days. It was 3 or 4 days prior to that. It was like Tuesday of last week that they went to Toledo and lost. That was they lost by 23 at Toledo. A MAC team. And again, I'm not trying to diss the MAC. So before anybody goes running out telling their MAC people that I'm dissing them, no, some good teams in the MAC, but you don't expect at that point, what was a 7-1 Michigan team to go on the road in the MAC and gets run out of the gym by 23. I'm still not sold. Again, they have not played a really high quality strength of schedule. They played Ole Miss, okay team, lost by 11, so right now we're just kind of waiting to see what they're going to look like when they get into Big Ten play. And Kathy, let's throw Michigan State in here because we didn't have them in the run sheet. I kind of feel the same way about Michigan State. They really haven't beaten anybody and then lose to Nebraska at home. But as you mentioned, the net loves them. They're like number 11. 11. But I think part of that, one thing I'll tell you about Michigan State, I think I found this and maybe I'm misremembering here, but I think it's Michigan State. I think what's giving them love in the net is they've got like 5 games where they've had 90 plus points and they've won like 4 or 5 games by like 40 plus points. 40. But they haven't, but it's again, they're not quality. It's not Power 5 teams that they're running that up on. So I'm not sold on Michigan State. I think Michigan State falls back. That's one reason I probably didn't include them here on the run sheet.
You're right. That's right. They have 5 wins with 40 or more points in 5 games where they have scored 90 or more points. So I think that's inflating their net ranking too. Again, we saw it last year. We went up to Michigan State. Granted, it was without Grace Berger, but we lost to them. So you just don't want to go on the road at all with any of these teams, especially the teams in the middle of the pack, and just assume that they're going to be cakewalks. Rutgers was not a cakewalk when we just went up there, right? Like they had to work and they had to make sure they were on point with what they were doing. So there are no night offs in the Big Ten, with maybe a few games, with a couple of the teams towards the bottom. But, any of these teams that we're talking about, Minnesota, especially Maryland, I just think they're too well coached. We haven't started talking to them about that yet. And Michigan, and Michigan State, I just don't think you want to take any of them for granted.
No.
Even though we don't know what to think of them yet. So, which just makes them even more dangerous, I think.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump down here to Penn State. They're the kind of been the pleasant surprise. You mentioned this, and I was going to save it for this part of it, but McKenna Marissa was injured in that Ohio State game. I did look on Google trying to get some information. All they kept saying was it was a lower leg injury, and there was no update based after what happened in the Ohio State game. So we don't know if she's going to be out any significant length of time. If she is a big loss. She is one of the best players in the Big Ten, if not the country. They're 7-3 overall. They lost, as we said, that game in Columbus to Ohio State in overtime. Their other losses, they lost to a very good, I think right now, number 6 USC team. That game was a 1-point game, 71-70. But then they lose to West Virginia. Okay, decent team, but they get blown out by 18, 83-65 as their other 2 losses here. The other thing, they're averaging 84 a game. They give up 67, and Marissa's averaging right now at 17.2 to lead them. But for our fans who've been following IU women's basketball for a while, the saga, whatever you want to call it, of Ashley Owazu, who started at Maryland, transferred out to Virginia Tech, where last year she was playing pretty well, but got hurt and never really did get back into the lineup. I think maybe didn't even play at all in the NCAA tournament for them. And then she decided to transfer out to Penn State, but she hasn't played a game yet for Penn State this year. And everything I could find leading up for today to try and get ready for tonight is it's kind of a mystery injury. Nobody at Penn State is really saying what's wrong, but she has supposedly been warming up with the team pregame, and there was some speculation you might see her in the Ohio State game, but she never got in. So is she back soon? Is she not? If she happens to come back and can contribute and Marissa's out, that will help alleviate some of that. But it right now is just, right now, Penn State right now is kind of in that boat of, well, if they got McKenna Marissa, we're going to keep talking about them. If not, then they're probably going to go back toward the back half of the league. But what are your thoughts on Penn State, Kathy? You've watched them a little bit more than I have.
Yeah, well, I've only watched them that second half, and again, the overtime game with Ohio State. So what I saw from them, they were very athletic and very aggressive. And then you add Marissa into that. And again, assuming she gets back, at least hopefully at some point, which I hope for her she does, because she was on fire that game. But she had some surrounding players for her too. And if you add in Owusu into that mix, I think that Penn State is going to give a lot of people trouble, and not just, the USC that they have earlier this year are taking Ohio State to overtime. I really think that, Penn State is going to be a team to watch this year, kind of like Illinois was last year. I think they're the sleeper team for me right now, at least what I've seen on paper, and then what I saw in that half with Ohio State.
And Kathy, I'm going to let you talk. So we kind of, right now for our listeners, we kind of taken this as the top 3 teams that we kind of project at the beginning, and then more of kind of either the pleasant surprises or not quite whether sure we are buying or selling on them. Guess we should have done this as almost a buy or sell segment now that I think about it. And now let's talk about, I kind of classify them here as, at least the underachieving teams that from what we thought they might be at the beginning of the season. And Kathy, why don't you start with Maryland?
Maryland. Yeah. So right now, Maryland is 8-3 overall. Now their losses though are interesting. So it sounds bad on paper, but their 3 losses are all to ranked teams. So first is South Carolina, who is number 1 right now. They lost to South Carolina handily, which almost every team has so far this year, outside of, I think, Utah this last weekend took South Carolina down to the wire here pretty good, but they lost 76-114. They went to Connecticut, which I thought was just impressive. They were going to try to do that, but just got their butts handed to them 48-80. And then number 23, Washington State in Mexico. Not New Mexico, the state, but like the country, Mexico. They played down in Mexico and they lost that game 67-87. And then their only, wins of maybe of note would be Syracuse at home, but they only won by 2, 83-81. And then they opened up Big Ten play at home against Northwestern, where they won that one comfortably 71-58. They're averaging 82 points per game, but they're giving up 71.7 points per game. And again, that's inflated with 114 from South Carolina, indeed, and 87 from Washington State and 80 from UConn. But still, the 71 points per game is quite a bit to be given up. And then in terms of leading score, that Cheyenne Sellers right now at 16.7. So I haven't watched Maryland this year, and they were the one team that we were not quite sure about at the beginning of the year, right? Like they have a lot of moving pieces in there, but we really like Brenda Freese as a coach. We knew they were going to be really battle tested, and boy, they sure have been, but I was thinking at least for sure with that Washington State game, they would be a little more competitive than losing by 20 to Washington State. So I don't know what quite to think of Maryland. And then in terms of net ranking, they're still coming in at number 48. So they definitely have dropped in net rating, I think, from where we would have thought they would be. Right. But again, like I wouldn't discount them with the coaching staff that they have. Brenda Freese has been a coach that has historically shown she knows how to write her program. I think, was it last year? They had kind of a similar thing, kind of a rough non-conference start, and they came in and they ended up fourth in the conference last year, right?
Right.
So, I don't know what to think of Maryland, but they are definitely not one I'm ready to write off and overlook because of those 3 losses.
So you'd be buying still on Maryland?
I'm still buying Maryland. Yes.
We should have done this as buy and sell. Why do we think of these things in the middle of the show instead of beforehand? But I'm with you. I'm going to buy on Maryland a little bit but I think what's different about this year, at least in the early part, Kathy, is it's the way they lost. It's not so much that they lost to South Carolina. They've played UConn for the last few years, every year, but they got blown out. South Carolina, like you said, 114-76. UConn, 80-48. Washington State, 87-60. They were getting beat. And then I can't remember who it was in the non-conference as well, but because we're almost all the games at this point are non-conference, but I want to say it was like George Mason or somebody like that they had at home that they struggled with. I mean, it was only like maybe an 8 or 9 point win over George Mason, a team that you would think traditionally they would just blow out. And yeah, they beat Northwestern, but a little bit of that was a struggle. They were only up 7 or 8 going into like the fourth quarter, and Northwestern's picked to be at the bottom of the league. So you're still a lot of questions about Maryland, but I'm with you. I think Brenda Freese will figure out some way to get them toward the top 4 or 5 of the league and find a way to get in the NCAA tournament. But I'm not sure they can jump into that top 3. But I think they're going to bypass some of these teams that we've been talking about. Anything else about Maryland you want to throw in here?
No, I don't think so. Other than, I wonder if it's like, what we have a tendency to do on the men's side with the Tom Izzo effect, where everyone just assumes Michigan State's going to kind of turn around there on the men's side. Maryland may have the same kind of similar struggles. And I also wouldn't be completely surprised if we see them more in that, 6-7 range of the Big Ten too, if they can't kind of turn the ship here. But yes, for now, still buying.
Yeah, and for those bringing that up about Izzo and Michigan State, Eamon Brennan with a really good article if in the Substack, if you want to find that, I believe you can find it there as well in Substack about will Michigan State kind of make the bounce back, which is kind of what we're saying about Maryland. We're trusting they will, but yeah, you don't know. I'm going to take Illinois here, and they're 5-3 overall, but I think that again, this was a perception that this was the sleeper team that could go from last year to this year and maybe be knock on that door with the top 3, that this was going to be the team that would challenge those 3, possibly at least to sneak in there in third. And if they, things fell right. Illinois is off to a 5-3 start overall. They lost, as we said, to Michigan at home at the State Farm Center, 84-48. They've also lost to Marquette by 4 and by 11 to Notre Dame. They're averaging 77.5, giving up 61. Genesis Bryant's leading the way at 14.8. Kendall Bostic is averaging an Indiana kid, Northwestern High School near Kokomo. Kendall Bostic averaging right around 12 points a game and 12 points and 9 rebounds a game. So almost a double-double for Bostic. But you just get the feeling, and again, this could be a team that would surprise, but right now, Kathy, you just get the feeling that they're not what we thought they were going to be. So I'm not ready to sell on them yet, but I still need to see more before I'm 100% buy.
Yeah, I'm still kind of a push on Illinois right now. Maybe I'm selling a little bit from where I thought they were earlier this year, but on the other hand, their loss to Michigan Notre Dame was only 11 points. What's given me pause is that loss at home to Michigan, 84-48. Like, that is really some, like you like to say, that's a crooked number right there. A crooked score that you never want to see ever, but it's certainly not at home and certainly not in your conference home or at home. So now I'm having a little pause, and I'm almost ready to hit the sell button on Illinois, but I don't want to do that after one game, and certainly not going to do it after, excuse me, the loss to Marquette either. So, but looking through their schedule of the 5 wins that they have, 5 wins says to me, hey, Illinois really has what it takes to put it together, because again, outside of Notre Dame, they didn't really play anybody of note and Marquette in their non-conference schedule. So huge question mark for me on Illinois. I think probably bigger than some of the other teams that we've talked about so far.
That's awesome. I think you made some really good points there. Why don't you talk about the nemesis, that team up north, as Woody Hayes used to say, the Purdue Boilermakers. Yeah. The team in black and gold.
Yeah. So real quick before we leave Illinois, they're number 50 in net ranking. So the net's not real super excited about Illinois so far either. Speaking of not super excited about net rankings, Purdue is currently a net ranking of 81. So their net ranking is really not good. And their record matches that. They are 6-4 overall. They opened up at Minnesota, as we mentioned earlier, and lost that game 60-58. So played them tight and on the road. So that's nice. Their best win, though, is over Texas A&M, 72-58. They have losses to UCLA, which is not a bad loss at all in terms of who they lost to, but it was 92-49. They lost to Florida, 52-49. So again, close, still a loss. And then Georgia, 65-57. They are only averaging 68 points per game. And they're giving up right around 60. So defensively, that's around what Indiana's giving up. We're right in the mid 50s. So they're just above that. But wow, only putting up 68 points per game is probably not a good recipe for success. And, to that point, Abby Ellis is leading them in scoring at only 14 points per game. So it really looks to me for Purdue, again, not having been able to watch them yet this year, it's on the offensive side that they're going to have to figure out to put some production up if they're going to finish in that top half of the Big Ten, where we thought they could potentially be. We thought maybe in the top 6, but right now it's not feeling like they're going to.
And we thought this was going to be a potential bubble team, or maybe a low seed NCAA tournament team, a 9, 10, 11 type seed. And right now they're out. And now the net's not going to get them in as an enlarge.
Fourth worst in the Big Ten.
Yeah. And we've got it. And again, like we said throughout the episode, a lot of this, if we do this a month from now, a lot of this is going to change, and they may surprise us. But right now we're basing on what we've seen so far in the stats, the records, what little we've seen them play. But right now, what you see out of Purdue is they're struggling to win close games. A 3-point loss to Florida, 8-point loss to Georgia, 2-point loss to Minnesota. So they're struggling to find ways to win close games. And that sometimes can be a really bad thing, because you're in those games and you're kind of thinking they'll break your way. But it's interesting how sometimes you just don't seem to go up. Whereas some teams, go back to like the 1989 IU men's team, they seem to find ways to win those games. Always like, oh, it was a 2-3 point game, but Indiana won. Another 2-3 point game, Indiana won. Well, those are the differences you get from being a top level team in the league to being kind of a middle or lower middle level pack. So they're going to have to find a way to start winning some closer some of these close games, and hopefully they don't do it against us. But that right now, I'm kind of like you were talking about Illinois. I'm a little bit of push here on Purdue. I'm not ready to sell that they're going to stay down there at the bottom type of the Big Ten, 10th, 11th, but I'm not sure they're going to make much more past 7 or 8 either. So I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to add about some of these teams, Kathy?
No, I think we covered them pretty darn well, Jeff.
So anyway, questions I had, Kathy, for you, and then I'll answer it. Okay. Just how good is the Big Ten to top to bottom right now?
After walking through almost all of the teams here, I mean, we didn't talk about some of the bottom teams between Wisconsin, Rutgers, and Northwestern particularly. I think they're still about where I expected it to be, right? Like maybe a little bit of a mix up in the middle, not surprising. The middle, it's just so hard to judge, but top 3 teams still Indiana, Ohio State, and Iowa, of course, right there. I still think, Charlie Creams with his rankings of Maryland, Nebraska, and Michigan being in. I think those are right on. And then Penn State, I think, is going to be the sleeper of this. The biggest surprise is Illinois for me again. So depending on where they're at, I'm kind of bleeding into, I think, your next question, which is kind of how many teams will we get in? I think those two questions kind of are symbiotic and go together. So how good are they? I think that we can definitely see maybe 6 or even 7 teams get in. If, Penn State is really, the darling right now of the Big Ten. They were in the rankings there for a minute and then they dropped back out. I can see us getting 7 teams in this year. So overall, 7 teams out of 14, I think that's an actual nice showing from the Big Ten.
Yeah, I kind of agree with everything you just said. It's about what we thought. Top heavy league. Some teams that were going to be in the middle. We may have been wrong about the teams we thought were going to be in the middle. Yeah. We thought Illinois, especially Purdue. But and is Maryland even a middle of the road team? Or are they more 7th, 8th? But again, we're going to believe in Brenda Freese until she, just proves us wrong. But I think like you said, Penn State, especially Nebraska, possibly Minnesota, jumping up and toward the middle of the league are good, are taking the places right now of what we thought would be Illinois, Purdue, and to a certain degree, I think Michigan was always that team we couldn't quite figure out either in the offseason. We weren't giving them the love that the coaches poll was, but we'll see what happens with that. I'm with you. I think definitely, I think it's a 6-team league. I think no matter how it shakes out at the end, it's going to be a 6-team league. I think they'll sneak a 7th one in, whether that's as a one of the first 4, the last 4 in, or a 10 seed there. But I think you'll see 3 teams hosting. I think I'm going to go on the limb that I do believe IU, Ohio State, Iowa will be those 3 teams, but I think you'll see 3 teams hosting coming in NCAA tournament time with that. So Kathy, I'll go with this one first. Any second thoughts on the preseason predictions? I'm going to say no, not right now. I don't, because again, I said Ohio State, Iowa, Indiana, were those top 3 teams. I'm going to stick with that. I may have been a little bit wrong on who was going to be in the middle, but I still think, especially Maryland and Nebraska, have a chance to stay there. Again, Michigan, I'm not quite sold on. Illinois and Purdue are the ones I guess I'm going to have to, at the end of the season, kind of go back and look at and be like, right or wrong. But it's been so far. The big thing to me here, Kathy, and I'll let you answer this one too as part of this question, just outside of the couple of games Iowa's won and the Tennessee, and again, right now the Tennessee win doesn't look very good for either IU or Ohio State. Mm-hmm. Nobody's won. And to a certain degree, it was kind of disappointing looking at this. How many teams in the Big Ten didn't schedule very aggressively? I mean, there were not a lot of the teams after IU, Ohio State, and Iowa and Maryland playing a lot of quality Power 5 teams.
Yeah. And, again, Iowa with Kansas State and Virginia Tech, they have probably, at least right now, have the best wins. Now, the Tennessee game for both us and Ohio State looked like it was going to be a really good marquee matchup. And, our Princeton game is holding up pretty well right now. I know they were playing earlier tonight. I don't know if they ended up winning their game, but, they were in and out of the rankings as well. So at this point, for the few marquee network, marquee teams. I'm not in baseball anymore right now. Any of the marquee teams that, some of the we have had, Kansas State, Tennessee, even some of the losses, or Florida that Iowa beat earlier, we really need those teams to start performing. Princeton and Kansas State, I think I mentioned them already, but we need them to do that to bolster our league, because we did have some teams schedule some really aggressive games. Maryland did, but they lost all of them, and they lost handily. And that's the problem as well, is that we had a few teams schedule some nice non-conference games, but outside of Iowa, I think, beating Kansas State, I don't think any of our teams have beat any ranked teams at this point in the season. Anyway, now that could change. Again, Tennessee could turn it around. Princeton could, make sure they sneak back up in that top 25 and whatnot. But I agree. I think it's going to be, you're going to have to win a majority of your games in the Big Ten right now, just because I don't think that we do have enough of those kind of great quality wins in the non-conference. A lot of non-quality losses, unfortunately, for some of the teams, us, the Stanford, as we all know.
Yeah.
But, USC with Ohio State, we just didn't seem to be able to pull it off when you get to the really cream of the crop of the NCAA.
No, you need a team like Oklahoma State who to have a good second half of the season. That win will look better if they do. If Marquette continues to have, again, not necessarily there are a lot of wins there, but again, a loss to Marquette doesn't look as bad if they're in the top 3-4 of the Big East. So some of that plays out. But again, like you said, just not a lot of signature wins. And again, this is where you schedule like IU, Tennessee, and Princeton. Well, you beat them, but you're also kind of at the mercy of what they do the rest of the season as well. And like you said, Iowa and Maryland both really kind of going out and playing a lot of top quality, top ranked teams, but outside of Iowa, nobody's winning, and so that's, one of those things. So anything else you got to hear? You got any questions you have for me that,
No, I don't think so. I think my one question I had for us was the second thoughts on the preseason and predictions. And I am not really second guessing any of them except for maybe Illinois and Purdue. I think they might be lower than I originally thought they were going to be, in that Penn State, and maybe even Minnesota might kind of jump in front of them.
So, well, go ahead.
All right.
You're fine. And so we'll be back next Wednesday when we'll kind of do a post-game show out of the Evansville game. We won't have a post-game show on Monday night after that game. We'll just come back next Wednesday with our regular Doing the Work podcast, and we'll do the post-game there. We'll also preview Bowling Green, and maybe we'll also take a little bit deeper dive into the Big Ten schedule coming up for the Hoosiers as well, because they will start Big Ten play on December 31st, New Year's Eve. They'll host Illinois at Simon Scott. That game has been moved. I saw that it had been originally scheduled for a noon start. Now it's going to be 12:30 Eastern time, 11:30 Central. And we're thinking about going down for that, because it's New Year's Eve. You can go down, watch the game, and still drive back to, for us to drive back to Rensselaer and still be back in time and get off the roads before all the crazy people are out driving. So.
Yes. And update, I told you that Princeton was playing somebody and I couldn't come to the brain. They beat Rutgers tonight, 66-55 at Princeton. So I knew they were playing somebody and my brain just couldn't come up with it. So Princeton beat Rutgers 66-55. So kind of an interesting note on both hands, since we played both of those teams this year.
Yeah. It is. And not shocked that Princeton has already said, beat Princeton. He actually used the word dominated. So, but with that, so we'll be back next Wednesday, a week from tonight. Simply Call will be on tomorrow night with their usual show at their usual time. Excuse me. If you want to see us do the show live and be a part of the live chat, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@backhome network. That's the @ sign. youtube.com/@backhome-network. You can be a part of our private community as well. Find out more at assemblycall.substack.com. Special thanks to John Ringer of Rig Design for designing our logos. And also a big thank you to Bob Thompson for our music that you heard throughout the broadcast. And thank you for listening. And those of you who are watching in the live YouTube feed, the Workaholics here tonight, thank you as well. We'll be back to talk IU hoops again with you soon. And let your friends know about our podcast. We've been getting some nice, kind of anecdotal stories from friends and stuff that they found our podcast in one way or another. But if you've got friends who enjoy IU women's basketball or just basketball in general, pass them along and let them know that Kathy and I are doing this podcast and enjoy doing it for all of you out there who want to listen to talk about IU women's basketball. And we'll come back next Wednesday to do that. Until then, we'll talk to you on Wednesday. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Wrong one. All right. Hey, that was our longest show we've done for a long time, I think. So I guess
it looked like we were
up about 10 teams.
Well, we did, but it was more. I really wasn't going to talk about Michigan State because I'm pretty much sell on Michigan State until they prove me wrong. But I thought, well, we better mention them because they were, I didn't have their record, but they've only lost like once or twice. So,
well, Northwestern is getting throttled by DePaul, 47-19 at halftime. Wisconsin is
who's mediocre.
Yeah.
And that's not a very good DePaul team. They're an average Big East team this year. And that's why I was talking about that win for Maryland. Maryland only winning by 13 at home. There's a little bit of a warning sign with that as well, but we'll see. Win's a win. And like Eagle, I appreciate the comments from you in the Workaholics. You get to tell your friends. We're trying to expand this out. We don't know. We always, Kathy had somebody come up to her down in Florida and tell her how much they enjoyed the podcast. And I every once in a while I'll be someplace like down in Bloomington. I was there for the Murray State game, and had a couple of people tell me they liked the podcast. Yeah. They saw me and stuff. So, it's nice to hear, but we just want to spread the word and get more people, as we can, listening and watching as well. So, and my friends, her stepbrothers found us somehow. So if you're listening tonight, Brent, thanks, and hope to see you again soon, maybe over Christmas when I make it back to Southern Indiana. So it's just kind of fun finding people out there too. So I had a couple of people in Fort Myers come up to me and kind of talk to me and let me know about listening to the show. So really appreciate everybody that's there. I mean, otherwise Jeff and I could just get on the phone and talk with each other. So it's a lot more fun when we have people chatting along or giving us comments later. So we appreciate it. Yes, we do. So, and we'll be back, like I said, next Wednesday. We'll do a post-game show of the Evansville game, and then also preview Bowling Green, kind of a 2-for-1 show there as well. And then maybe kind of keep it in time, listening, because as we get over the holidays here, we may have to adjust schedules a little bit based on Kathy's schedule with her family, my schedule with my family, things like that. So, but right now we're still planning on if there's not a game, we're kind of planning every Wednesday night to be back here with you on what we're referring to now as Doing the Work Radio. So, there you go. So. All right, Jeff. Well, thanks for tonight and getting Kathy, us going, and have a great night, and we'll talk to you in a week. Yeah, we'll talk to you next week, Kathy. All right. Have a good one. Talk to you later. Bye, everybody. Bye.